Welcome to the AI Renaissance podcast. I'm here with Mark Kilaghbian, CEO of Dating. Mark, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Doing well. Can't complain. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for being on. This is the third ever episode. We're a podcast that talks about AI, but very specifically from the creator's perspective. We talk about builders and creators and how you're approaching the space and um, really what you see in the whole world of opportunity. So to kick things off, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background, what you were doing before dating, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Sounds good. I've been an entrepreneur for about 10 years. Ever since college, I went to University of Texas. I was the entrepreneur of the year there for a company that I started. It was like an ed tech platform that was an Uber for tutors, essentially. And so I got VC funding, as a sophomore, I think, in college, and just got hooked right away. I just loved the sort of rush of like getting a group of guys together, working on a hard problem, putting it out there, seeing what happened. And so I just kept rolling with it. After that, we met some guys who were very early in crypto. They'd started something called cryptoexchange.us back in 2011. So we started building some like crypto products. We built a lot of like early NFTs. We built actually the first decentralized exchange back in 2016. So we played around a lot, but frankly, we were just like too early and no one wanted to bet on us. So I learned the value of like finding good investors who will back you, who will trust you when you've got a fire idea. And so I started to try to find that network, and I did with my next company. We worked on a personal data monetization platform. So we brought in people's data from Facebook, Fitbit, YouTube, Apple Health, 30 data sources, medical records, financial data, anything and everything. And we had about 100,000 people contributing, and we helped them sell it to people like Harvard Business School, Best Buy, Target, market researchers who basically wanted more data on consumer spending, but also the ability to go approach those people and ask them more about the process. And we were able to pay them a good amount of money. We could pay them $10 often for just, filling out a survey, sending a little bit of data. And so we sold that company to a crypto company. But I never really got to take it the full distance that I wanted. And frankly, we had a really hard time finding any data scientist who could take this multi-source data from all these different places and turn it into insights that these businesses wanted. We hired some of the
Interesting.
best guys from PayPal. We hired the best of the best. They just couldn't do it. And even at, really the only people that could do it were quant funds who had the absolute like highest tier engineers, but they wanted more data than we had. They wanted, a million people, and we never quite got there. So, um,
So on that point, actually, since I mean it ties into the eventual conversation we'll have around AI and kind of how it's transforming businesses in general, but that seems like a very interesting problem to run into, and it seems like you ran into it pretty early, right? Where it's like, yeah, I mean, it seems like you were. I mean, pretty early in kind of this. I don't know if it was even like an AI project at that time, but like basically taking these various data sources and trying to run some kind of analysis on them. This is probably even like maybe even before LLMs were a big thing.
yep.
But I'm very curious because you said that you worked with a bunch of different data scientists. What was the core problem that you kept running into that prevented you from getting those insights and making like something that was useful out of that? Because I've thought about this so much, like even on the media side, where it's like you can almost like, and you have a crypto background, I have a crypto background, like you can almost take like a network of oracles, and if you can pull insights out of those, you can like do some really crazy stuff around like media and news and things like that. So I'm curious like what those like problems were, and like how you think about like if you were to try to get now, like as the tech kind of developed and advanced to a point where you can maybe try it again.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, our thinking in those days, we were before like LLMs really like I recognized pretty early that like Facebook's value was the data and their competitive advantage was the LLM that they had basically closed source at that point and no one else had the billions of dollars to get something that good. Um, but I recognized, I think, even then that that was going to be democratized at some point. The cost to implement stuff like that was going to go down, and the real value was going to be in the data. And Facebook was coming to us to actually check their data. Their data integrity team was like, a lot of our data is not very good. When's the last time you went in and edited your Facebook likes and your Facebook bio? And a
Mm,
lot of that they don't know what to trust and what not to trust. So having multi source data can be really valuable if you know which one is sort of the source of truth, or you have a good methodology to determine what matters and what doesn't, and which ones to trust over others if there's data that contradicts itself. So a lot of it is categorization, figuring out the broader buckets to stick this data in when there aren't any methodologies that really exist to combine it all. So a lot of the work we were doing was just from the medical records alone, they were all structured completely differently from different providers.
mm,
And so, just to unify the data into a way that we could start to analyze it from that perspective was difficult. And so, there was work there. But I'd say the bulk of the difficulty for the data scientists was in combining all of the data with the business use cases and just having an idea of where to even start, which frankly ChatGPT is way better at. I was frankly doing most of it. So like one example, we had Best Buy come to us and they were basically just like, find us something interesting. Tell us something we don't know using the data you have. I was like, okay, well, we have, purchase data from all these people. So I know if they're an Xbox Live subscriber. And this was right when the PS5 and the new Xbox One was coming out. So I started running all of their purchase data through Xbox Live and PlayStation Network, figuring out what their like spend was on each of these platforms, and then also what their relative spend was at Best Buy, if they were Best Buy customers, if they're going to competitors. And then we started to survey them and ask, like, how are you feeling about these new consoles? Are there certain games that would push you over the edge? And if you do you plan to buy most of your games on these new consoles? And I was able to calculate roughly how much spend was going to be moving between these two consoles and how they might want to, reshuffle their inventory based on that or their purchases. And I thought that was pretty valuable and it was pretty cool. And we had real data behind it, and they could go back and ask these people and track them over time to see if they actually made those decisions and actually switched over. But that was stuff that just the average the average guy we hired just couldn't pull all those kind of pieces together and figure out like here's a good business case that you guys care about that we have the data that might actually tell you something.
yeah, very interesting. And like, what do you think now? Do you think things have progressed enough where you can maybe start building stuff like that that takes various data sources, and even if the data is maybe not exactly structured in the same way, like especially like with Cloud 3, which came out like a couple days ago, people are showing some pretty crazy results. Like, do you think it's maybe getting, if it's not there yet, getting close to a point where you can start maybe thinking about applications that are like very broad in that way?
I mean, yep, and that's why I started this most recent company. Like I just started throwing all the data that I used to test our old system on into some of these models, and it was giving me very close to what I wanted, from the onset. So that's what got me excited, and then we just started feeding it and seeing what happened. So I think it's going to still be a process. It's a lot of work to figure out what works best for different processes. Some are better at categorization and deducing things, and others are going to be better at explaining those things to the people on the other end or graphing it. And so there's a lot of different pieces and all these pieces are evolving at different speeds. And so I think that's the difficulty now. But I think as far as if it's possible and if it will be possible, it certainly will be, and it's already very close. So it's just a matter of, I guess, smoothing it out so that it works reliably, is what I'd say.
Yeah, interesting. So let's get into the story that you alluded to just now. So what exactly is the genesis of what you're working on now? Maybe, it seems like there's kind of an interesting story around it. Maybe you can tell that story and then kind of how it led into the company that you're building now.
Sure. So I mean, the story isn't that crazy. The story is I've frankly been just wanting to do this since that last company that we sold. My like grand vision was eventually, instead of just matching people with things and offers and ads, you match them with people. I think that's like a much better value add to society, and that's where real value is. And I think that's what Facebook realized very early on, that that's what people actually care about.
Mhm.
And I think I also recognize that specifically in the dating app market, there was seemingly like a real inability to do this well. And throughout the years, it had seemingly just been getting worse. So everyone that I knew in the early days of Tinder were always talking about the people they had met on the apps. They'd always, I guess, just found more like the people they were looking for. And over the years, it just seemed to be getting less so, and I couldn't really understand
Yeah.
why. And
Yeah,
then,
yeah, and now, yeah, I mean, it's like taboo now, right? To use Tinder, it's like who's going on Tinder, right? Like it's like
exactly. And so I felt like, we just need like a radical shock to the system, something completely different that's exciting, that flips all the old models on their heads. And this was just kind of the perfect way I felt like to combine those two things, what I knew well and something that I felt was really needed in society, I guess.
yeah, yeah. I think it's a very interesting problem for sure. Like, I think all kinds of connections are going to kind of like go through like a complete transformation just in how people connect, how people organize, how people meet. Like, um, especially when you combine like some of the discovery around AI with like the network building and the network kind of like infrastructure of crypto networks and blockchains, like that's very interesting. But back to your like original story, you said you were looking through a bunch of data that kind of led you to this conclusion. Like, what was the data you were analyzing, and then to the actual dating app market maybe now. I've seen quite a few folks, even well, I would say like really enhanced by the latest developments in AI, but kind of tackling this problem of all the dating apps being very much taboo and just not very useful, and either infiltrated by bots or just not not helpful in general. So and there's different approaches to it. So I guess like maybe two-part question is just like, what was like the data that you were looking at, what kind of insights did you see there that led you to tackle this problem? I guess you were interested in
Yeah.
it for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, so frankly, one reason I got more interested in it is I just was became single for like the first time in like 10 years.
Oh
So
yeah, of
it
course.
wasn't really
Yeah,
it wasn't a
yeah.
problem that I could feel it, with all my friends and family, but I wasn't really facing it. So after that point, I got on all the apps again. I started using them, and I realized that like 90% of the interactions were just, scammers and bots, and they weren't real people. Um, and it dawned on me, just like as ChatGPT started to actually get implemented, how many of these conversations were legitimately ChatGPT. I started just testing the prompts, and you would get like prompts back, and you would find the red lines that would trigger it. And I just started to realize like how much of people's time is probably being spent just talking to bots now, and they don't realize it. How many hours of people's time has now been
Yeah.
wasted, which is just kind of sad to think about. And I was like, let's just cut all of that out and let the bots negotiate with each other, figure it out for us, and then deduce hopefully what we want, or at least deliver it to us in a way that is way less work, way less crap in between. So my idea was that you could pull in all of the data, from sort of your core social platforms, so TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, um, and have the AI analyze both the text and the pictures, So it'll start to come up with a sort of persona of who you are. So there's no profile creation. There's no like adding the tags of the like five weird things that you like and choosing between those, or the five pictures that you think best represent you. It's just the AI figuring that out, and then you training it over time as to what you want is the idea. Um, and so I just started by pulling in my own data and seeing what it would tell me about myself. And it was actually really interesting. So I just started listening to it. And it was like, you should date someone who is outgoing, who like cares a lot about the environment, and like three other things. I'd never dated a girl like that. I was like, wow, I've actually never dated an outgoing girl. That's actually insane now that I think about it, because
Interesting.
that's a big part of why it didn't work, because they never wanted to go out, they never wanted to hang out, network, you know. Um, and so then I started seeing a girl like that, and we started to train the AI. It started to get better, and I started to just sort of ask it about things like about the relationship with this girl. I'd say like, what concert should I take her to? And it would
Mhm.
give me her favorite concert. It was like crazy. She'd be like, "How did you
No
know that was
way.
my legit like yeah."
Wow.
So it was really getting good, and to the point where I'd say like, "What should I make sure I don't mess up on?" And it was like she really cares about like pictures, and like make sure if she asks you to take a picture, like don't mess it up. I was like, "Yeah, whatever." Well, she blocked me after I fucked up her pictures of us at like a rave. She dressed up super cute, put a ton of time into her outfit, and I just took the worst pictures ever, and she lost it. And I was like,
That's
wow,
funny.
you know, it was bittersweet, because I was like, damn, this thing actually works, but also I really like that girl. So it's like, if you can prevent some guys from making these dumb mistakes, I think at some level, a lot of people they're trying to do their best, but they just don't know what they're doing anymore. People don't know how to interact with each other. They don't know what one person's
Yeah.
red line is and what they actually care about. Um, and if it can help with that, I think it's interesting. So we're just sort of, continuing to manicure it and see what it can tell us about ourselves.
Yeah, very interesting. I think that part is super unique, where it's not just a discovery tool. It's not just like like a gallery where you're just seeing a bunch of faces, but like if you do match with someone or whatever, you can also talk to it, and it's going to know as much about you as basically anybody else, right? Because it just keeps getting trained on what you like and
Yeah.
how you give it
The
feedback.
idea is that it's like a matchmaker. So it's like
Yeah.
your personal matchmaker. And if you look at like a show like Millionaire Matchmaker, you watch that, you realize a lot of what she's doing is like that these guys are paying for is not actually like introducing them to women. It's telling them how to be around them and not like drive them insane. And like it's a lot of like coaching, really, is what they're paying for.
Yeah.
And they're coaching both parties. They're telling the women, look, this guy, he might be a little brash at first. He's a little, full of himself, but he is a nice guy. I've known him for a while. He treats people well. And then vice versa on the other side. And I think that's what a lot of people might need, is that sort of in between that's like an unbiased third party that can kind of help people come to that understanding. And I think in the past that was people's friends. People had that mutual friend who was doing that, but I think a lot of people just don't have that anymore, and it's become
Yeah.
less common.
That's super interesting. You know what I never thought about was the idea that the LLM is, or like the model is not only evaluating the other person, but it's also like using the LLM to describe that person in specific language that's like kind of catered to you, right? Like, and over time that will happen,
Yep,
right? So
100%.
that I think is super interesting, and that's a big unlock because it's like people don't necessarily just off of photos, you might not necessarily get the vibe of that person, but like if you have a full profile based on five different social profiles, and the model sees a bunch of these people and they can kind of break down like what you care about, the kind of characteristics that maybe are not that representative
Yeah.
immediately.
And I think and what we're doing with it is we're having it basically sort your characteristics by like what's most interesting to the other person. So It's creating these data cards based on your data, and that can be like, I just ran a 10K marathon, and it's like it might show that to the person who's really into running, but it's might gonna minimize that to the person who hates exercise. And so like finding ways, where we want it to be honest, but also just like give people their best shot to be interesting to the other person, showcase the things about them that will be most interesting. If I'm a DJ who just did a collab with one of my favorite artists, how else are you going to figure that out? um, but on our platform, it'll know the Spotify, it'll know what you do for work, and it can tell you in literal text terms, hey, this guy just collaborated with your favorite DJ. He's probably going to get you into a pretty cool show next week if you go out with him. By the
Yeah, yeah.
way, he drives that one of those Mustangs that you really love. So just finding
Yeah.
ways to make people interesting and not box them into like one persona that they kind of have to like stick with based on who they're trying to be, I guess,
Mm,
or represent themselves as.
right, right.
And I think that's good
Uh,
for both parties, because I think a lot of women that I've talked to have been just frustrated that people aren't showing all sides of themselves. You get like a very small view of someone, and by combining all these networks, who you are on LinkedIn is different than who you are on Twitter, which is different than who you are on TikTok, which is different. Like you have each of these versions of yourself, and I think it's good to just pull them all together and turn people into real people who are multifaceted and might have more dimensions, and people might actually like each other more as a result.
yeah, totally. So let's go into maybe how the platform or the application actually works, like how it actually looks, and then maybe we can go into like under the hood too, like some of the technical components. Um, so yeah, maybe like let's start with initially like what the interface is like when you first go in as a user. Like, what are you doing? What kind of data sources are you connecting? And
Yep.
then like what the experience is like after that.
So, I mean, you'll start and it's really simple. It'll just say start to link the sources that say, the most about you. So, you can link your Facebook, your TikTok, your Spotify, your Apple Music, Instagram, a couple others. And we're going to be adding more as we go. We'll have a few like Apple Health. And
Oh,
then you'll
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you'll also be able to do like calendar integrations, so we can automate the scheduling, and like actually integrate everything there. So you'll do that. It'll start to analyze you, and it'll open basically like a ChatGPT looking chat interface. So the app is mostly a chat interface. You'll have a tab for dates. You'll have a tab that shows you your profile and settings. Other than that, it's going to mostly be a chat interface. Um, and then it'll start telling you what it thinks it knows about you. It'll ask you a little bit about what you're looking for, and what you think about yourself. And then it'll just start to throw matches at you, and it'll say, what do you think of this person? Here's what I know about them. Here's why I think you'll be a good match. If you say you like them, it'll say, here's a date I think you would both like. It'll try to schedule it, between the two of you. So if you say you would like to do it, it'll send a date request to the other person. It'll show that person why it thinks you're a good match, um, and that person can accept or reject. So the idea is to minimize any like chatting between the two people. People will be able to connect. I think like we'll do like 24 hours before the date. We'll like share contact info, but the idea is like less just pickup lines that are generated by ChatGPT or some like dude on Instagram. Like just cut out all these opportunities where you can turn someone off by some dumb thing that isn't really representative of you, and just get people to meet each other in person over time. And then once they do start meeting, learn from those interactions and have it, ask the people how it went, what they would like to have gone differently, and start to train it over time to just find those people on an ongoing basis. And it's going to be finding them based on, a variety of things. It can be a combination of, what you're looking for. If it's I just want someone to go to a rave with this weekend versus I want an incredibly long term romantic partner who wants 5 kids. It's ideally set up to be flexible and find you whatever you're looking for, which is what makes it, kind of interesting. I think it could eventually be used to the point where it's like, I want a throuple. Find me two people who are willing to to do that with me.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, so yeah, that's essentially the bones of how it's set up. We're also going to have remote dating set up, so you'll be able to use FaceTime and eventually like Apple Vision. So you'll be able to do these sort of like remote interactions where while you're chatting, the bot can kind of be like in the corner of your window telling you like, here's why I think you're a good match. Here's some things you might talk about. Here's something interesting about that person, and kind of guide them in like a chat roulette style interface is kind of the idea. But that's going to be the bulk of it. A lot of the pieces we're still working on, frankly, are like the date ideation. We'd like to make our money mostly on commissions from actual dates. So we want to make money when people are actually going out, meeting each other, um, and being successful at that. So we're trying to find partners for things like ticketing and events and just fun things that we can slowly start to utilize as options for dates that are automatically scheduled, and that also gives us the ability to offer refunds if someone gets ghosted or things don't go as planned.
yeah. That's super interesting. And is it like a kind of like a swipe kind of thing? Just
No,
like okay, how does it
no
look? Is it like
swiping.
you get presented one person at a time, or
Yeah, one person at a time. So it's like you're chatting with ChatGPT, and then it pulls up like a profile card essentially, and you click view, and it like pulls up a profile.
okay,
So there's no swiping. Yeah, that we're trying to just avoid the swiping as much as possible,
yeah,
and I
yeah,
think
okay,
over time the idea is that it'll be probably integrated in your Apple Vision, and you'll have just like your little Cortana that's sitting there, and you're just like, I'd love to go on a date this weekend, find me someone, and it'll be like, all right, I've scheduled with this person, and just
yeah,
automate it as much as possible, make it like requesting an Uber, make it super easy, and just get people out making the interactions and trying
yeah,
things is the idea.
nice. So uh, let's maybe talk about where you're using some of the AI components. So the two places I can think of are in actually creating profiles of people. And I know you're not creating like external profiles necessarily. It's more of a chat kind of thing, but I'm sure internally there's some kind of profile. Obviously, you're using the some kind of model to analyze all the data that you're taking in, and then also, I'm sure you're using, whether it's ChatGPT or some kind of other API to actually have the interaction. So, yeah, maybe you can talk about a little bit
Yep.
about how you're using AI in the platform.
So the
Yeah,
first the first use case, you're right, is pulling in all of the data and starting to deduce like what is the persona, what can we immediately glean from this, and just start bucketing that data um, into like easy to use sort of tagged profiles. And we're also actually exposing a lot of that data on the profile, so the profiles will show your posts from Instagram, it'll show um, you know your tweets, or well, we don't have Twitter yet, but it'll show like your music history, your streams. So if you listen to the same artist, it'll show you what you're listening to. And so we're actually using AI to sort those cards based on the interests of both people. So we have one layer where it's comparing those cards between the people and figuring out where do they have similar interests and what might they want to be shown immediately about the other person on the profile itself. And that's separate from the iteration of creating that persona, which is used to actually match them. And the actual matching is done by a different AI that takes those personas and trains against matching them together over time. So we've got essentially those three layers there, and then we also have a layer for the physical attraction matching. So, you'll have the ability to throw in like three pictures of the most beautiful women in the world, and it'll do its best to start finding you people that are more like that. So there's
Mm,
that layer as well. Um, and then there's just the actual chat interface, which is ChatGPT. And so we have all these hooks inside of ChatGPT that are calling different functions to like display the profiles, for example, or display a date card. And then inside the date cards, we're also creating like small blurbs where the AI is basically analyzing why it thinks you'll be a good couple and what it thinks why it thinks the date is a good idea. So it'll be like a little bit of extra analysis in there. So there are a bunch of like moving pieces, and as far as the underlying technology for all of them, we're still playing around with like a bunch of different stuff that we're just kind of testing in parallel and figuring out, because things are just moving so fast. We keep using one and then someone else says, you should try this, and we're like, oh, that one does work pretty well. So we're trying to stay flexible wherever we can and just create hooks that can be easily swapped out for other things if they become better, and also run a lot of them in parallel. And we probably will run some in parallel with our early user groups to just see which ones really do work best in combination with some real world, data and users.
yeah. And to that point, where are you guys in the in the product life cycle? Like, are you in beta at this point? Have you released to the public openly, or yeah, how is that looking?
So we basically just did like a friends and family kind of wait list, because we basically just needed like a little bit of real data to start moving away from like training data and see what happens with like real data that's scattered in like an organic way, where it's, probably not full data sets across everything. You'll have different people linking different sources, so getting like a realistic distribution of all that. So we really just targeted about 250 people on that, which we got. That's still open. If you want to join, you can link your data sources. It'll start to analyze you and start to tell you what it thinks about you and display those data cards so that you can see it. Um, and so that's live. We'll plan to have that up for a couple months. We're building out the app right now. We've got most of the approvals for the data sources, which is frankly what takes the longest. A lot of those you have to
Interesting.
fight. Like Spotify, we're still 7 months in with them.
Wow.
So that's honestly, people don't realize how much of a struggle that can be.
Yeah.
But so that part is mostly done. We have approvals on almost everything, and I'd say we're targeting 2 to 3 months for starting to launch our pilot in LA.
Nice. Amazing. Um, so I wanted to shift maybe towards actually, you know, the aspects of building a startup, and especially in this market that you're in. I think dating apps. It's such a I don't know about tough space, but it's really a monopoly, right? It's like the Match Group is. I don't know what percentage they are, but it's like 70%, 80% of
Yeah,
all of online dating. So how do you first think about that? And I mean, on the startup side, you've been doing this for a long time, so I mean, maybe I'm a little curious, like how this is different than other spaces you've been in, and especially like with this AI wave. I think
yeah.
playing that is very interesting. But yeah, maybe let's start there.
No, I mean, I love it anytime I see a monopoly like that and I see people who are unhappy because of it. It's just easy, in my opinion. It's like they've kind of backed themselves into a corner. Almost every company that they buy up, they basically just bolt on their business model and make it worse, and seemingly under the hood just rip out whatever algorithm was working decently and replace it with theirs, because their model is really just to force you into paying for more exposure wherever possible and moving you along the chain as you get, really disgruntled with one app, you delete it and download one of the other ones they own that you don't realize is also theirs. So they've
Yeah.
just created this game of musical chairs where they always win and they don't care. It's actually better if you fail on one and go to another one to try it. They've got 20 more for you to, step in line with. And I think they've
Yeah.
realized they'll make more money that way than just retaining one client on one app for a long time with the risk of them meeting someone and leaving forever. Um, so, I mean, it's just the incentives are really perverse. And when you start to see like even the pipelines that they're creating, like Badu is getting into a lot of this like live streaming stuff where you're just tipping girls, and it's just they're just kind of creating this like cam girl pipeline almost that I feel like is all moving towards, I don't know, just kind of the OnlyFans model almost,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
so
Interesting. Everything is now OnlyFans.
yeah. So I think, it's been really interesting in the sense that almost anyone who seems to get legs in the industry gets bought up by them. Most people are like they get to like 100,000 users and they just take the 20 million bucks, and a lot of them will just do that 10 times. They'll just keep starting new companies and selling them to Match Group, which seems to be a hustle in its own right now. Um, but for the people who are, I think, just willing to stick it out and really try to build a good system, it seems like it's not that hard to do so. I think it is really hard to get that initial mass, to get people excited, to scale it. But when it comes to like competing on a technology level, they're super weak on technology and on their implementations. They're just going to take forever. Tinder takes, a year or more to develop a new feature, and they'll scrap it in a day if they don't think the user base is excited about it. And so they're just constantly throwing money at things that they're not that confident in and making big promises that they don't tend to deliver on. So I'm not that worried about them outcompeting us on a technology level. They certainly have way more money to throw at marketing, and I think it's going to be, tough to get a really outsized bang for our buck on marketing. So we just have to be really creative and get that initial mass that's required to get it going.
So that's the big thing, right? With a dating app or really any kind of application like this, you're building a network, and you need, or more so than a network, it's kind of like a marketplace, right? You need
Yep.
people on both sides. You need buyers and sellers. So
Yep.
you need that critical mass, like you mentioned. Like, how do you think about going about getting that initial critical mass?
Yep. So, I mean, we're working with a lot of people on campus. We've got some like really good representatives at USC, UCLA who will help us co-sponsor frat parties. A lot of the underground events in LA we're working with, who will let us co-sponsor and do a lot of like physical stuff. So we're gonna have a feature where you can just bump your phones and it'll start to like analyze two people and tell you what it thinks, you like about each other or if you're a good match. And so try to create like in-person activation opportunities, potentially in partnership with some of these speed dating events in LA who have approached us and who are interested in just having a competitive advantage over the other speed dating events in LA and just having something interesting for them to show off to their people. And so, from that perspective, it hasn't been, we've been putting together a lot of plans to make sure we get both. And a lot of it is also on the product level, trying to be smart about, you know, what the incentives are. Like on Tinder, it's just swipe as much as you want. And because you're swiping that much, you can go through 100 people in, 5 minutes. Well, with our app, it's going to be a lot more difficult because you're going to be chatting. The hope is that you're going to get like a deeper insight into this person. There's going to be an incentive to ask more questions, try to go deeper, and hopefully create some like fun UGC that people will share as they get interesting things sent back to them. And so hopefully it'll be a little easier to do because our goal is to create like fewer deeper connections, at least in the early days. So if we can really incentivize people to just try out their matches, and you know not just try to run through the whole roster in a day. I think that's our goal, for it to be something that gets better the more dates you go on, and to really push people just to give each other a shot, knowing that it will get better as a result.
Yeah. Do you think, broadly speaking, do you think that AI is going to be like a big kind of aid in, helping people find companionship, helping people find connection, where, maybe that kind of stopped after a certain point in the social media era? But like, do you think AI will help enable that? Because you're also seeing the flip side of that, which is like, AI boyfriends, AI girlfriends, where it's like not
Hmm.
using the AI for human companionship, but kind of
Yep.
replacing the human companionship with an AI companion.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. Like, I don't really know how to judge that, right? Like, some people are for it, some people are against it, but that's kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. Like, how? Yeah, I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
how you think about
No,
that?
I think we should aim to have the AI facilitate more human connections, and if it really can't, then I don't think it's the worst alternative to having nothing. I've remembered just going to a lot of like old people's homes back in the day, and they were just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
so lonely. And if they had a little Cortana sitting there talking about their war stories or something, like
yeah.
honestly, that would provide a lot of value. So I don't want to say that like
I
there's no
agree.
place for that. Um, and I think broadly, what I would like this to be is an AI that is really truly trained on you, and I think it has the capacity to be one of the ones that actually interacts with people more than most others. Most people really aren't using ChatGPT. They're not using most of these tools. So you need to create a real use case where they start to build a relationship, and they start to actually share the things that are going to make it smarter and help it provide that value. And so I think this is an interesting way to potentially do that. And I think if you train it with the goal of just facilitate meaningful connections between people, that's kind of a good mission statement to build one that's pretty powerful in the long term. And I think it's bound to happen. I think we're all going to have our little Cortana in our AR glasses. And it really just comes down to, is it going to be a one that we can trust, one that we rely on? And I think, you know, now is the time where that's going to get built. So there's kind of a war to see who wins that battle, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I could not agree more. I guess final question here from my side is like, how involved are you getting, like, your team, on the actual, the tech layer? Like, are you playing around, kind of fine tuning these models, like, very much, and like playing around with what works? Are you kind of using them? I'm sure you're not using them directly out of the box, but like, how kind of deep do
Yeah,
you
no,
get?
there's you have to go like really deep with all of it, and like we're architecting it all out in like 4 layers. We're figuring out which models and which tuning we have to use with every model for each layer, and how it works once you pull it up between the layers. So there's honestly a lot. I was frankly in the early days hoping it would just be plug and play, and
Yeah,
it wasn't bad plug and play, but it wasn't perfect. The problem is it's just really inconsistent. So sometimes it would just be perfect, and then others it would just be so far off that you can't ship a product like that. So it's and but some of the consideration is just over time it does get better, but over time sometimes it gets worse. So there's been a lot of just figuring out what's reliable, what we can potentially make more so our own, um, and a lot of considerations, yeah, around all that stuff, and even just where we can get credits, where we might have cheaper costs. That's all a factor too. So a lot of moving parts there, a lot of considerations that need to be made. But it's been interesting because every day there's a new tool that potentially solves a problem, which is a gift and a curse in a lot of ways.
mm, yeah, very interesting. I think it's such an interesting space to be in right now, and to be building in. every few weeks, it feels like there's something that's just going to change. You know, just change the industry entirely. So, yeah, very exciting times. Mark Kilaghbian, thank you so much for being with
Absolutely.
us on the AI Renaissance. Where can people find you? Where can people find dating?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Mark Kilaghbian. You can go to dataing.io. It's just data.ing.io. You can find me on Twitter at cryptoeconomy underscore. Um, and yeah, I have a podcast called the Crypto Economy Podcast if you're into crypto, so you can listen to that too.
Amazing. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. This is great.